Have you ever made a mistake that changed everything? I did. And that one mistake haunted me for 18 long years. My name is Susan, and it all started on what seemed like an ordinary day in the doctor's office. I was sitting there, my fingers nervously twisting the strap of my purse, while the soft hum of the fluorescent lights added to the tension in the air. Dr. Evans, a calm and collected woman with gold-rimmed glasses, glanced at me over the top of her screen, her expression unreadable. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this emotional journey. Share your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. Susan, I need to ask you something personal, she said, her tone gentle but probing. Have you and your husband maintained a normal intimate relationship over the years? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach dropped, and a heat spread across my face. The truth was simple yet crushing, 18 years. That was how long it had been since Michael and I shared anything beyond the responsibilities of daily life. For 18 years, we had been strangers under the same roof. Hearing it out loud made the weight of it all unbearable. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but I knew it wasn't the truth I wanted to say. Michael and I hadn't been intimate in years, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. We were just two people living side by side, going through the motions. I could barely focus on Dr. Evans as she continued speaking. My mind kept drifting back to Michael, to the life we had built. We'd been together for 30 years. College sweethearts, married right after graduation, both with good jobs and a comfortable home. But somewhere along the way, the connection we once had faded, and what was left was a hollow version of what we used to be. When our son, Jake, went off to college, the house felt emptier, not just in sound, but in spirit. Michael and I became strangers in our own home. Our lives were so divided, I felt like I was living with a roommate, not a husband. And then, in the summer of 2008, I met Ethan. Ethan was the new art teacher at the school where I worked. He was younger, full of life, with an easy smile that made me feel alive again. Where Michael was steady, calm, and predictable, Ethan was a whirlwind of energy, excitement, and inspiration. He reminded me of who I used to be, carefree, passionate, and open to the world. At first, it was just friendly conversation. Small talks between classes, coffee breaks, nothing more. But the more we spoke, the more I realized how much I was missing. He made me feel noticed, valued, and appreciated in ways Michael hadn't in years. Before I knew it, I was drawn to him in ways I couldn't control, but what I didn't expect was for Michael to notice. It wasn't what I thought it would be. What happened next shattered everything I had known about my marriage. Keep watching to find out how everything came undone. Ethan was everything Michael wasn't. Where Michael was steady, predictable, and distant, Ethan was vibrant, full of life, and spontaneous. It started innocently, just friendly chats in the teacher's lounge, small conversations about art, literature, and life. But something about Ethan's energy started to stir something in me that I had long buried. Every time we talked, I felt seen. I hadn't felt that way in years. It wasn't even about the physical attraction, it was something deeper. It was about the feeling of being alive again, of having someone truly listen to me, someone who appreciated the person I was, not just the role I played in my marriage. And the more time I spent with Ethan, the more I realized how much I had been missing. One day, as I walked into the classroom, he handed me a painting he had done. It was a watercolor of wildflowers, bright and colorful, the flowers standing tall amidst a field of green. "It's for you," Ethan said with a smile. "You remind me of these wildflowers. Quiet, but full of life." I stared at the painting, taken aback by the depth of his words. The wildflowers were a perfect metaphor for me. I had been quiet for so long, blending into the background of my own life. But now, Ethan saw me for who I truly was, someone with depth, beauty, and the ability to bloom. And just like that, a door that I thought I had locked away years ago creaked open. The spark between us grew, and soon it wasn't just small talk. We started spending more time together. Coffee breaks turned into lunch outings, and lunch outings turned into long walks by the lake. Each conversation felt like a lifeline, pulling me further from the life I had built with Michael. But there was one problem, Michael noticed. I knew he was always aware of things going on around him. He wasn't the type to ignore problems, he just chose not to address them. But I could tell he was noticing my growing distance. "You're working late a lot," he said one night, his eyes glued to the TV as I rushed to get ready for bed. "Everything okay at school?" "Just a lot to do," I replied quickly, my heart beating faster. I knew I was lying, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. He didn't push. He just nodded and continued watching TV. But there was something different about the way he said it, his voice had lost the warmth it once had. He wasn't mad, he was disappointed. And in that moment, I realized that something had shifted. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. It wasn't long before my secret relationship with Ethan began to change. What had started as innocent conversations soon became something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. I was falling for him in a way I couldn't control, and I knew that I had crossed a line. The guilt crept in, but the connection I felt with Ethan was like a drug. The more time I spent with him, the more alive I felt. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. We were just talking, after all. Just spending time together. It wasn't like anything physical had happened between us. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I realized I was lying to myself. I was in the midst of an affair, one I had promised myself I would never have. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to end it with Ethan, to come clean to Michael, but the other part of me, the part that had long been silenced in my marriage, wanted to keep feeling alive, to keep feeling seen. But then came the day that would change everything. I thought I had everything under control. I thought I could handle it. But nothing could prepare me for the moment when the truth came crashing down. Keep watching to find out how the affair was exposed and what happened next. It was a beautiful afternoon in the countryside when everything changed. I had told Michael that I was going to a faculty workshop, but in reality, I had arranged to meet Ethan. We had planned to spend the day sketching near a lake, surrounded by nature. It felt like a perfect escape from the suffocating silence at home. We arrived at the lake, the golden sun casting long shadows across the water. Ethan and I set up our sketch pads, each of us lost in the calmness of the moment. The air was cool, but the warmth between us felt like an unspoken promise. We talked about everything, art, poetry, life. It was so easy with him, so comfortable, and I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in years. Then, as the day began to slip into evening, Ethan took my hand. I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't. It felt like a moment of truth, a realization that everything I had been hiding from Michael was slowly unraveling in front of me. Just as Ethan was about to speak, to maybe say something more, I heard a voice that sent my heart racing. "Mom?" I whipped around in shock. There, standing a few feet away, was Jake. My son. He was staring at me, his face pale with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. And beside him stood Michael, his expression unreadable. The ground felt like it was giving way beneath me. Time seemed to freeze as I saw Michael's face for the first time in hours, maybe days. His eyes locked on mine, and I could see something there, a mixture of disbelief and pain. In that moment, I knew. The truth had come out. Jake stood there, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "What is this?" Michael didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back to the car, his steps slow, deliberate. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My entire body felt frozen. Ethan, looking startled and unsure, stepped back, giving me space, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done. Michael had seen. Jake had seen. I had been caught. The drive home was silent, and it wasn't the silence of a peaceful car ride, it was the kind of silence that swallowed everything. Jake was in the back, his eyes trained on the back of my seat, his face a mask of anger and hurt. Michael was beside me, his silence more deafening than any scream could have been. When we got home, Michael did not yell. He didn't demand explanations. He just told Jake to go to his room, and then he sat across from me. His eyes were cold, colder than I had ever seen them. "How long?" he asked, his voice steady. It was a question, but it felt like an accusation. I had to tell him. There was no hiding anymore. 3 months, I whispered. But nothing happened, Michael. We just talked. I swear. Enough, he said flatly, cutting me off. His voice was like ice. He stood up, pacing slowly across the living room. "I'm giving you 2 choices. 1, we get a divorce. You walk away with nothing. Or 2, we stay married, but from now on, we're roommates. Nothing more." I was stunned, frozen to the spot. "Michael, please." "No," he interrupted. "You'll act like a wife in front of everyone else, but at home, we'll be nothing more than roommates. And if you can't accept that, we'll get a divorce. But I'm done with this." I didn't know how to respond. Divorce? Roommates? It felt like the entire world was crumbling around me, but the worst part wasn't the punishment, it was how cold and distant Michael had become. He wasn't angry, just done. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Keep watching to find out what happened next and how we both began to live this new reality. That night, Michael's words echoed in my mind like a constant, nagging hum. We are roommates. Nothing more. It was a phrase I couldn't escape. I had thought the affair with Ethan was the hardest thing I'd ever face, but I was wrong. Michael's decision to shut me out, to make us strangers in our own home, was far worse. I lay in our bed that night, alone, staring at the ceiling. Michael was on the couch, the distance between us now more than just physical. It was a chasm that neither of us could cross. The silence was suffocating. The man I had spent the last 30 years with, my husband, the father of my son, was now a stranger to me. It wasn't just the coldness. It was the complete absence of any emotion, no anger, no sadness, no confrontation. It was as if he had shut down completely, like he had buried all of his feelings so deep that there was nothing left to say. I had expected him to yell, to demand answers, to make me feel guilty. But he didn't. He simply turned his back on me and walked away. The next morning, things didn't improve. Michael made coffee, but neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than any words could be. It became clear that this was the new reality. We were roommates. We existed in the same space, but we weren't living together anymore. We weren't partners. We weren't husband and wife. We were just people sharing a house. And that was more painful than I could ever have imagined. Weeks turned into months. We went through the motions. I cooked his meals, did my best to keep the house running, but every action felt empty. He went to work, came home and retreated into his study until I was asleep. The house was cold, emotionally and physically. Every day was like a repetition of the last. The affection, the connection, the love, gone. But what hurt the most was knowing that this was my fault. I had broken everything. And now, Michael had made his choice. He didn't want a divorce, but he also didn't want me. He didn't want a wife anymore. He wanted a roommate. Jake came home for Christmas that year. The house was still silent, but now, there was a third person trying to fill the void. Jake, growing older, seemed to notice the strain between us more than he ever had before. He tried to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. One night, we sat down for dinner. Michael and I exchanged pleasantries, but there was no warmth in our words. Jake was the only one trying to bridge the gap, but the walls between his father and me were too high. "Mom, Dad," Jake started, "is everything okay between you two?" The question hit me harder than I expected. How could I explain? How could I tell my son that everything was fine when everything was falling apart? Michael didn't answer. He just took a sip of his drink, his eyes focused somewhere in the distance. I knew then that this wasn't just about me and Michael anymore. This was about the life we had built, the home we had created, and the damage I had caused. If you're feeling as heartbroken as I am over Susan's situation, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can follow the rest of the journey. This story isn't over yet, and things are about to take another unexpected turn. Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments, we're here to listen. But as the days went on, I began to wonder if there was any hope for us, any chance to fix what I had broken. But what I didn't expect was that Michael's decision wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of something much darker. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. The days turned into months, and the months turned into years. It felt like time had stopped moving forward for Michael and me. We existed in a cold, emotionless routine, each day blending into the next, until the weight of the silence became unbearable. I thought, at first, that I could fix it. I bought his favorite snacks, made his favorite meals, and tried to act like everything was normal. But nothing ever changed. No matter how hard I tried, it felt like I was speaking to a wall. Michael wasn't angry with me. He wasn't sad. He had simply stopped feeling altogether. There were moments when I wondered if he even remembered the man I married, the person he had once held close. The connection between us had withered away, replaced by something colder. At first, I thought it was just a phase, something we could eventually work through. But as the years passed, I realized it wasn't just a phase. This was our new reality. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that cuts through everything. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of two people trapped in a shared history that had long since lost its meaning. Michael would come home from work, make himself a cup of coffee, and retreat to his study. He never asked about my day. He never looked up when I came into the room. It was as if I didn't exist for him anymore. Jake would come home from college for holidays, but even his presence couldn't bridge the gap between Michael and me. The three of us would sit at the dinner table, trying to pretend like we were still a family. But there was no warmth, no laughter, no connection. There was just the constant, oppressive silence that hung in the air. On Christmas, I asked Jake what he wanted for dinner, trying to make the evening feel normal. He just looked at me, his face empty, and said, "Whatever." The words stung more than I expected. It wasn't just his response that hurt, it was the realization that he knew something was wrong. That year, I tried to make everything special, thinking that maybe it was just the holidays that made things feel so cold. But no matter how much I tried, it didn't change anything. Michael didn't say a word about Christmas. There were no gifts, no warm exchanges. It was just another night of pretending. We went through the motions. We acted like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Jake would leave for school, and I would go back to my silent routine. Michael would come home, and we'd continue living as strangers. We didn't argue. We didn't fight. We didn't talk. We simply existed. As time passed, I began to realize that this was my punishment. The affair, the betrayal, had broken something inside of him, something I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even disappointed. He had shut off completely, closed himself off from me in a way I never thought possible. And yet, there was still a part of me that hoped. A part of me that thought, maybe, if I kept trying, we could rebuild what we had lost. But deep down, I knew the truth: Michael wasn't the man I married anymore. And maybe, I wasn't the woman he fell in love with either. But what happens when you realize that no matter how much you want to fix things, some damage can never be undone? And what if the one person who still holds the key to your heart has already made up their mind? Find out in the next part. In 2013, something unexpected happened, something that, for a brief moment, made me think that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Jake got married. His wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, joy, and love. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter for our family. Maybe this would bring Michael and me back together, at least for a little while. It was a moment of celebration, a chance to reconnect, to feel something again. I tried to put on my best face, smiling at everyone, congratulating Jake and Sarah, our new daughter-in-law. But all I could think about was Michael. His coldness was still there, but in the light of Jake's happiness, I thought perhaps it was just a temporary thing. Maybe the wedding would bring us closer. During the ceremony, Michael's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, a gesture that almost felt natural. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for. I told myself that perhaps time could heal the wounds we had both been carrying. But as the evening wore on, I saw something that broke my heart in a way I hadn't expected. The guests were chatting, laughing, and raising glasses to celebrate Jake's new life with Sarah, and then I noticed something: Michael wasn't looking at me the way he used to. He wasn't looking at me at all. He was standing beside me, yes, but his gaze was distant, far away, as though he were seeing right through me. I had hoped that the wedding, the happiness of our son, would awaken something in him, something that would pull him back to me. But instead, it seemed to reinforce the distance that had already formed. The walls between us were high, thick, and I began to wonder if they were there for a reason. Later that night, after the guests had gone, I asked Michael what he thought about everything. Jake's wedding, Sarah, the future. I was desperate for a sign, some kind of acknowledgement that there was still a chance for us. But Michael just looked at me, his face cold and impassive. "You're asking me if things will go back to the way they were," he said, his voice flat. "Susan, we've been pretending for years. We've been pretending for Jake, for the family, for everyone. But the truth is, we're not who we were. We're not the people we used to be." And just like that, the hope I had been holding on to shattered. I had spent so many years trying to fix things, believing that love and time could heal everything. But Michael had already accepted the truth: we were broken, and no amount of pretending could change that. I knew in that moment that Michael had made peace with the life we were living, this life of coldness, of being nothing more than roommates. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring back the man I married. But what happens when you realize that no matter how much you want to fix things, some things are beyond repair? Michael's words stung more than I could have imagined. Stay tuned to find out what happens next and if there's any chance left for Susan and Michael. The days that followed Jake's wedding felt like a blur. I couldn't shake Michael's words from that night, "We've been pretending for years." Those words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing day. Michael had already accepted the reality of our marriage. He had closed himself off completely. And as hard as it was to admit, I realized he was right. We had been living in a lie. I tried to ignore the truth. I tried to tell myself that things would get better if I just kept trying, if I just kept being the wife he needed me to be. But every time I looked at him, I saw the distance. The coldness in his eyes. The walls he had built around himself. Jake's wedding had been a wake-up call. It wasn't just about the fact that Michael and I were living in a shell of what we once had, it was about the fact that everyone else could see it too. We were the couple who looked perfect on the outside, but inside, we were a broken mess. One evening, Jake called me. It was a few months after the wedding, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, his tone soft but insistent. "I know you and Dad haven't been, well, the same lately. You're not fooling anyone, you know?" I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain to my son that his father and I had become strangers? That the love we once had withered away into nothing? "Everything's fine, Jake," I said, my voice trembling. "It's just, we're adjusting, that's all." But deep down, I knew I was lying. The truth was far more complicated than that. Michael and I had become two people living parallel lives, never crossing paths, never truly sharing anything. Our marriage had become a series of polite gestures, nothing more. Jake didn't buy it. He knew. He had been watching from the sidelines for years, and now, he was starting to see the cracks in the foundation of our family. I couldn't blame him. I had been pretending too. Pretending that we could somehow fix things. But how could we fix something that had been broken for so long? One day, after another silent dinner and yet another cold night in separate rooms, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront Michael. I had to know if there was any chance left for us. I had to know if we could somehow fix what was so clearly broken. I found him in the living room, staring at the TV, as usual. The space between us felt like a chasm. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking. "Can we talk?" He didn't even look up. "About what?" he asked, his tone flat, distant. "About us," I whispered, my heart pounding. "Can we fix this? Is there any chance for us? Or have we just given up?" Michael sat there for a long time, not saying a word. I waited, holding my breath, hoping for some sign, some flicker of the man I had married. But when he finally spoke, his words hit me harder than I ever expected. "Susan, some things can't be fixed. Some things are just broken beyond repair." His voice was steady, but the pain in his eyes was undeniable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was just exhausted. Exhausted from the years of pretending, from the years of trying to make something work that had already fallen apart. What do you do when you realize that the one person who has always been there for you is the one person who no longer wants to be? Keep watching to find out what happens next when the truth finally comes to light. The days after that conversation with Michael felt surreal. I thought, maybe for just a moment, that we would talk about everything, the years of silence, the pain, the years I had wasted trying to fix something that had already been broken. But instead, Michael withdrew even further. The coldness, the distance, it all grew. And with it, the overwhelming realization that we were living in two completely different worlds. It wasn't that Michael hated me. He didn't. He had stopped hating me a long time ago. No, it was something worse. He had stopped caring. I had been so focused on how he was coping, on how his anger had turned to bitterness, that I failed to see the truth. Michael had simply given up. Not on me, necessarily, but on us. On the idea that we could ever be happy again. I tried to keep the hope alive. I tried to pretend that things would get better, that somehow we could find our way back to each other. But every time I reached out to him, every time I tried to engage, I felt a wall between us. A wall so high, so thick, that it felt like it had always been there, even when I thought we were happy. One night, after another of those silent dinners where we barely exchanged a word, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something, had to do something, or I would lose myself in this emptiness. Michael, I said, my voice barely a whisper, we can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending. He didn't respond right away. He just stared at the wall, as if my words hadn't even reached him. I sat there, waiting, hoping for something, anything. I'm not pretending, he said quietly, his voice flat. I'm just tired, Susan. Tired of this nothingness. I've been trying to make it work for so long, but I don't even know who we are anymore. His words hit me harder than any argument could. He was tired, and I had been blind to it. All these years, I thought it was me who needed to fix things, but Michael had already given up. He had been carrying this weight for far longer than I realized, and I hadn't even noticed. We're just two people living together, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. That's all we are now. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to scream, to beg him to try again, to fight for us. But part of me knew that it was too late. The fight had been lost long ago. There was no magic word, no apology that would undo the years of silence. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in so long, I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about years of neglect, years of living a lie, years of pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And I had been too caught up in my own guilt to see it. I never wanted this, I whispered. I never wanted us to become this. Michael didn't look at me. He just nodded, as if he had already accepted that this was the way things were now. I wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but there was nothing left to say. There were no more words that could heal the wounds we had inflicted on each other. As the silence between us deepened, I started to wonder, had we both given up? Was this the end of the road for us? Stay with me as the truth finally starts to break through, and the consequences of our choices begin to take their toll. The days that followed our conversation were the hardest I had ever faced. Michael's words were still ringing in my ears, and every time I looked at him, I was reminded of how far we had fallen. He was there, but he wasn't. I couldn't remember the last time he'd held me, or the last time we'd shared a moment of warmth. The walls between us had grown so high, I wasn't sure if they could ever come down. I tried. I tried harder than I had ever tried in my life. I cooked his favorite meals, bought him little gifts, even tried to initiate conversation, but he was a ghost. He would sit at the dinner table, his eyes vacant, as if he wasn't really there. The man I had once loved was slipping further and further away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then one evening, as I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, I saw Michael. He was standing in the living room, looking out the window, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. I had seen him like this before, but this time it felt different. There was something more than just tiredness in the way he stood, there was resignation. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. I wasn't sure if it was hope or desperation, but I knew I had to try one last time. I walked into the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "Michael, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He turned around slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness. Just emptiness. "What is there left to talk about, Susan?" he asked, his voice quiet, devoid of emotion. "We're living in a house, but we're not living a life." I couldn't stop the tears that started to fall. I had never wanted this, never wanted us to end up like this. I had made so many mistakes, but I had never stopped loving him. "I know I've messed up," I said, my voice trembling. "But I swear, Michael, I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose you. I don't know how we got here, but I want to fix it. Please, tell me what I can do." Michael stood there, silent for a long moment. His gaze softened, but he didn't answer. It was as though he was waiting for something, waiting for me to prove that I could still fight for us, still fight for him. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if we could go back. I wasn't sure if we could ever get back to the way we were. And as much as I wanted to believe that love could fix everything, I was starting to understand that some things couldn't be fixed. If you're still with me on this journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. What will Susan do next? Will Michael give her another chance, or is it too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The silence between us was deafening, but Michael still hadn't made a decision. Was there any chance left for us, or was this the final goodbye? The days after that conversation felt like an eternity. Michael hadn't said much after I begged him for another chance. He hadn't agreed to anything, nor had he shut me down completely. But the silence between us grew thicker. It was a silence filled with the weight of years of pain, regret, and unspoken truths. I tried to reach out, tried to make things right, but each time I did, it felt like I was talking to a wall. Michael was there, physically present, but emotionally, he was a million miles away. Every effort I made to bridge the gap only seemed to drive us further apart. His indifference, his complete lack of response, began to eat at me. I knew he was suffering. I could see it in the way he moved, in the way his eyes darted away from mine whenever I tried to engage. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, my apologies and efforts would break through his wall. But I was wrong. The wall had already been built, and no amount of regret or apologies could tear it down. Then, one night, after another silent dinner, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I needed to hear it from him. I found Michael sitting on the couch, the dim light from the TV casting shadows on his face. He was staring at the screen, but I knew he wasn't watching. He hadn't been watching anything for months now. "Michael," I began, my voice shaky. "Please, I need to know. Do you still care? Is there any part of you that still wants to try?" He didn't look at me. He just sat there, as if he were trying to gather his thoughts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Susan," he said, his voice low but steady, "I care, but not in the way you want me to. I don't hate you. I don't want to punish you. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of holding on to something that's already gone. The truth is, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were. I've been holding on for so long, trying to make it work, but I can't anymore. I'm done." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known, deep down, that this was coming, but hearing him say it out loud still shook me to my core. I felt my heart break all over again, but this time, it wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything we had lost. It was about the years of silence and the years of trying to hold on to something that had slipped through our fingers. I wanted to cry, to beg him to reconsider, to tell him that I could change. But I didn't. I sat there, staring at him, realizing that the fight was over. The battle for our marriage had ended long ago, and now all that was left was the cold, harsh truth. I had ruined everything. And now, I was facing the consequences. Michael had made his decision. He was done. But was I ready to accept it? Was there any chance left for me to rebuild, or had I lost everything? Keep watching to find out how the story reaches its heartbreaking conclusion. The weight of Michael's words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the room close in around me as I tried to process what had just happened. He was done. No more second chances. No more hope. The man I had loved for so many years had finally reached his breaking point, and I was the cause. I sat in the living room for hours, unable to move, unable to speak. The silence between us was deafening. Michael had turned his back on me, literally and figuratively, and I was left to face the aftermath of everything I had broken. I had been so consumed by my own guilt, my own need for forgiveness, that I had failed to see how deeply I had wounded him. I had hurt him beyond repair, and now, there was no going back. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had no right to cry. I had destroyed everything, my marriage, my family, my chance at redemption, and I had no one to blame but myself. The next morning, Michael didn't speak to me. He didn't even look at me. He was already preparing to leave, packing his things into a suitcase with the same detachment he had shown in the last few years. He moved around the house like a ghost, as if he had already checked out long before I had realized it. And in that moment, I knew that the life I had once known was gone. Michael was leaving, not just physically, but emotionally. He had already left me behind. I tried to speak to him once more, to apologize, to beg for another chance, but his response was the same as it had always been in recent years: silence. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't fight me. He just shut me out completely, and that was more painful than any argument could have been. "Susan, I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice quiet, yet final. "I'm done. We're done." I watched as he left, the door closing softly behind him, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. I had spent so long thinking that if I could just make things right, if I could just prove to Michael that I was sorry, we could rebuild. But now I knew, it was over. Michael was gone. Our marriage was over. And there was nothing I could do to fix it. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where Michael had stood just hours before. The house felt colder than it ever had. The silence was louder than it had ever been. And for the first time in 18 years, I finally understood the depth of the damage I had caused. I had destroyed the one thing I had once cherished above all else. Michael had made his choice, and now I was left to face the consequences. But was this really the end? Or could there still be a chance for healing, even after everything we had been through? Stay tuned for the final part of this heartbreaking journey. It had been days since Michael left, but it felt like years. The house was so silent. So empty. I had spent years trying to fix something that had already broken, and now, I was left to pick up the pieces alone. I couldn't even bring myself to look at the photos of our past, the memories of our life together. I had ruined it all. Michael had left, and with him, all the hope I had been clinging to was gone. The house felt like a cold, hollow shell. Every room, every corner reminded me of everything I had lost. Jake called me a few days later. He had heard about Michael's departure and was worried. I could hear the concern in his voice, but it was laced with a certain sadness too. He knew the truth now, he knew what had happened, and I could hear the disappointment in his words. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he said softly, as if he was walking on eggshells. I don't get it. You've hurt Dad. You've hurt us all. And now, everything's falling apart." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I didn't know what to say to him either. I had failed as a wife. I had failed as a mother. And I didn't know how to fix any of it. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could fix it. I didn't know if there was any way to turn back the clock and undo the years of silence, the mistakes, the betrayal. Michael was gone, and our family, once so whole, was now fractured beyond repair. The house felt so lonely. I wandered through each room, touching the old furniture, running my fingers along the things that once held meaning. The family photos on the walls, the trinkets from trips we had taken together. All of it felt like a distant memory, something I couldn't reach anymore. I could feel the pain of my actions settling in, but at the same time, I realized something else too: I had to let go. Letting go wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could do in a day, a week, or even a month. But I knew, deep down, that it was the only way forward. I couldn't keep holding on to something that had been lost for so long. I couldn't keep pretending that Michael and I could go back to what we once had. As I stood there, the weight of everything hitting me, I made a decision. It wasn't about Michael anymore. It wasn't about the past. It was about me. I had to find a way to heal. I had to learn to forgive myself and rebuild my life, without the man I thought I couldn't live without. It was going to be hard. It was going to take time. But I knew I had to take the first step toward healing. If you've been following Susan's journey, I want to thank you for sticking with her through this emotional roller coaster. Sometimes, life doesn't give us second chances, and we're left to face the consequences of our choices. But through it all, we can still heal and move forward. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more real-life stories and emotional journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think Susan can begin her healing process? We'd love to hear from you.